And really I've been asked today to talk about these cross-functional services. What does it look like? And it comes from a place of practice. So as Vicky highlighted, I worked in diabetes as a diabetes specialist pharmacist for 12 years. And then after COVID, I moved into cardiology. So I could have moved into the dark or the light, depending on which nursing forum you're part of. And have been working in cardiology now for, I think, over 3 years. And I do heart failure. I also do ischemic heart disease. I cover the whole of cardiology at my trust. And so have lots of experiences from both sides of the coin. I will also add that my trust is a tertiary renal centre, so I have lots of those floating around. I was horrified by the number of dialysis patients I suddenly found myself looking after on my cardiology ward, so I had to learn that quickly too. And I think what I'm really coming at here is, well, how? Kamlesh has really, really beautifully said to us, this is what we should be doing. We know that, right? We all agree. It's all sensible. The numbers are there. It's astonishing how much power and evidence there is behind it, far more than all the drugs that we keep throwing at everyone, but we're not doing it. So now we're really thinking about, well, how do we deliver this? Who should be delivering this? What is it that we're actually going to be delivering at the point of seeing a patient? Where should we deliver it? So, Kamlesh has voted very heavily for primary care. Not necessarily against him there, but, there's a whole, who's best placed to do this? When should we be doing this? And again, Kamlesh has really highlighted early on, has got a lot of power behind it. Or do we wait to cure it at the end? And then how? I'll talk you through some of the examples in practice, some of the published examples, and my own personal example of what we're doing. So again, highlighted by Kamlesh, but, all these people have all of the conditions. We work in silos. And I'm a secondary care pharmacist. However, I've done, over the diabetes, I spent 2 years working in primary care as part of an NHS England project, delivering sort of CVRM medicine within primary care. And again there, I was still seeing practice nurses, the same nurses, doing hypertension clinic on one day, diabetes clinic on the second day, CKD clinic on the third day, because structurally, that's how we're set up to be paid. This is not about the individuals thinking that this is a grand plan. This is structural payment, and the same happens in secondary care. We are only paid when the patient turns up in a clinic. If I set up a clinic that does 3 things, we're still only paid once. There is no incentive to us working, holding our hands together. And, we all hate reorganisation, but we are all having to push more towards this. Again, this is the interconnections between all these diseases, and it doesn't really matter what this says. It's taken inherently in your head when you see the patient sat in front of you, there's a lot going on here. That's all we really need to think, isn't it? There's a lot going on here. And then the gut-wrenching fear when you think, do I know enough about all of these? As a professional, it's much easier to say, well, I've got really great diabetes knowledge, I'll do diabetes really well. And acknowledge that there might be some heart failure going on, but that's a different team, so I won't have to pick that up. Do I know enough to make a good intervention there, or am I going to put my patient at risk? It's not from laziness, it's from the I don't know enough setting, isn't it? I haven't had time to learn this, I don't understand their drugs, I don't know how this sits together. What do I do? Now, the current way we have it is individual defined disease clinics, individual defined guidelines. That was my favourite. I think there's something that comes up about this later. But from a patient perspective, because we have these individual setups, what it means is totally uncoordinated care. So I currently run heart failure CVRM clinics. So technically it's under the cardiology heart failure, but in my clinic I regularly start GLP-1s, make insulin adjustments, and that comes from my own personal experience. But the patients, the feedback from the patients is astonishing. Compliments are sent in because they're like, I actually felt like someone knew everything about all of the bits. They felt, even though all I'd done was adjust the insulin by 10%, very simple rule, take that one away, but all I'd done was adjust it by 10%, the patient felt they'd had their diabetes and their heart failure treated. It was not a clever adjustment, but the patient felt like somebody had done more than one thing. And as a personal patient, so I have type 1 diabetes, which is why I ended up there in the first place, but I have type 1, and as a patient, I can't tell you how many times I have sat in a clinic and they have totally ignored everything else going on in my life. I had twins, and I remember going to my first appointment after I had my twins, and the consultant telling me that the good control I'd had during my pregnancy, when, FYI, only me was being looked after, had slipped and I should try harder to get back to where I was. The twins were 5 months old at the time. I was like, I've kept the small people alive, I feel like I've overachieved. Do you know what my HbA1c was? My HbA1c was 58, which is perfection, thank you very much, and alive small humans. But that was the kind of mentality that I was facing, and this is what our patients face when they sit in front of us. So our lack of confidence is not a good enough reason to think, well, I won't change that thing because, I won't undertreat that, the inertia, I won't add in this, I won't deprescribe this, because that's not my patch to do. And actually, this is all about building our own confidence. It, in some ways, has nothing to do with the patients, because they're going to turn up and get the care delivered that we are going to deliver. It sits inside us. What are we going to do about it? Now, this is an example. It is from 2012, so it's quite an old one, but it was a Canadian example. And this is the most extreme version of a CVRM clinic that I found. I was quite surprised when I found it. And it was a Canadian healthcare system, which is not that dissimilar to the NHS. And they had multiple clinics. So they had 2 arms in this trial. One continued with separate clinics. So they had MDT clinics, but it was a diabetes MDT clinic, a cardiovascular MDT clinic, a thing. And they carried on usual practice. And then they created a second arm, which was an integrated clinic. Now, just to see how many people, and all of these people turned up and saw all of the patients, which I could not get my head around. They all sat there and discussed every patient. So, fair play. But they had a DSN, heart failure and or renal nurse, a pharmacist, yay for us being included, because we never are, dietitian, nephrologist, cardiologist, endocrinologist. Each patient was reviewed by all of them. And what they